Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked here on the channel. This is the series where I talk about every single book on my shelves because we've got a necromancer to catch. This week we are talking about C.M. Waggoner's The Ruthless Lady's Guide to Wizardry. I'm just hitting myself in the face with it, don't worry about it. Cue the intro music. Some quick disclaimers before we start. I was bought this book by a friend or family member as a gift, regardless of where books come from. Nobody's paying me to talk about books except my patrons, and all opinions are my own. I'm going to keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible while still talking about the book as a whole. If you do want to go in knowing absolutely nothing, pause the video, come back when you've read it, we'll talk then. I'm sorry for the dramatic dog sighing in the background if you can hear that. She's having a dramatic day. And lastly, I will link the story graph for the book below in case you want to check out any user-generated content warnings. This is an adult fantasy book that has a strong romance thread going through. I wouldn't call it a romance book in the traditional sense, nor a fantasy romance, but it is a romantic fantasy. Do we have a word for that? It originally came out in January of 2021, so it's still fairly new. I somehow thought it was older than that before I started scripting this. And is technically a companion novel or another novel in the same universe as C.M. Waggoner's other book, Unnatural Magic. So there are cameos of characters in this, apparently. I wouldn't know. I haven't read Unnatural Magic, so that's where I'm coming from when I'm talking about this. C.M. Waggoner also working on a third book, so we've got that to look forward to. Alright, it's a little bit of a long blurb, so settle in. Take a sip of tea, let's go. Delaria Wells, petty con artist, occasional thief, and partly educated fire witch, is behind on her rent in the city of Lacecourt. Again. Then she sees the wanted sign, seeking female persons of martial or magical ability to guard a lady of some importance prior to the celebration of her marriage. Deli fast talks her way into the job and joins a team of highly peculiar women tasked with protecting their wealthy charge from unknown assassins. Deli quickly sets her sights on one of her companions, the confident and well-bred Win Sinalum. Sinalum? The job looks like nothing but romance and easy money until things take a deadly and undead turn. With the help of a bird-loving necromancer, a shape-shifting schoolgirl, and an ill-tempered reanimated mouse named Buttons, Deli and Win are determined to get the best of an adversary who wields a twisted magic and has friends in the highest of places. Ba-ba-da-ba. Not only did I reread this book to prepare for this review, I also looked up some interviews with C.M. Waggoner to see if there was anything I didn't know about in terms of the inspiration for the story, and also to discover, to my joy, that there is another book in the same universe. One of the things she talked about is that this is a story where women are front and centre in all the roles, from the protagonist to the antagonist and everyone in between. I hadn't thought about it that way, but reading that, I thought it was really interesting to want to cast women across the board in terms of their morality. I thought that was very cool. Not only is this a Sapphic story with a Sapphic relationship at the forefront, but it's also the story of women becoming friends, and women of all ages growing together and developing relationships with one another, which I thought was very interesting. There are maternal relationships, platonic relationships, romantic relationships. It all comes together in a way that is very enjoyable to read. It is very much found family-esque kind of storytelling. This book, while it does tackle themes like necromancy, and there are some difficult moments for sure, is overall, I would say, a fun romp. It's almost got a heist-like element to it in terms of solving some of the problems they encounter, and it's got a sapphic romance at its core, and I think that is just a recipe for a good story. It was very fun to read. The first time I read it, I definitely read it too quickly, and I couldn't savour those moments, and I couldn't enjoy the coziness of it, but around this time, enjoyed it very much. You know I'm always here for some necromancy, and I thought the magic overall in the story was very cool. I assume there is a bit more of it in Unnatural Magic, and I also assume we see a bit more of the societal attitude towards magic. In this, we really mainly see Deli's fire witch abilities, and we hear people talking about some kind of sciencey elements of magic here and there. You don't get a lot of detail, which is not always my favourite thing. You know I love a hard magic system that explains itself, and you don't 100% get that here, but it is still very cool. So overall, very cool plot, very cool characters, very emotional moments in a good way, a lovely romance that's complicated but also very simple, and just a nice time, a good reading experience. Flipping onto the other side, things you might want to bear in mind if you're planning on reading this: a huge content warning for addiction and drug use in this book. It is not something that the main character herself personally deals with, but a family member of hers does, and it is very gnarly in places. I would say if that's something you're sensitive to, you might want to either give this a miss or just make sure you're adequately prepared. The other thing I'll mention is that Deli very much has that sort of almost Cockney character voice that is on occasion written phonetically in the text, that can make this quite difficult to get into, and I think it's why I didn't like it as much the first time. I haven't gone back through those vlogs and seen if that was the case, but I have a memory of just feeling like I couldn't access the book. This time around, I'd read other similar books around about the same time, and also I had more time to read this in, so I felt like I could ease myself into it a bit more. So if you're finding you're struggling with it, just give yourself time to get used to that voice, and I think you will have a more enjoyable time reading this. Don't force it. And lastly, I kind of already touched on this, but there are a lot of things that feel very much like you're just scratching the surface in this story. The character studies, very, very deep. The overall sense of what the world looks like and how their actions have an impact on the world, a little bit more shallow. So if you're wanting a fantasy story that is a bit more epic in nature, I don't think this is necessarily the story for you. In terms of comparisons, other things you might want to read, I definitely think there's a Tamara Pierce argument in here, not necessarily in all of the tone, but certainly in the character archetypes that we see. I think there's definitely a Tamara Pierce influence on these books. Likewise, I felt a lot of T. Kingfisher in there, particularly Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, which is not just because it's a very similar title, they do feel like similar books to me in a lot of ways. I think it's that combination of spookiness and darkness and a willingness to accept that life can be really hard, alongside that more cozy element that just makes a wonderful cake of a book in the middle. Should you read this if you're interested in it? I would say yes. I think my one big barrier to entry for this book is that tone, that voice that Deli has in this story. If you can get either past that, or if you can get into that is probably the better way of saying it, I think you'll really enjoy this book. I certainly did, and I'll definitely be rereading it in the future. And I'm very excited that I now can go back and read Unnatural Magic, and also whatever comes next. Have you read this book? Do you have plans to? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're down there commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You can also follow me on social media. You can come hang out on Discord where we have chill chats about books. I'd like to say an enormous thank you to all the ghosts who haunt me over on Patreon. They support the channel and in return get early access to videos, bonus content, live streams and more. If you'd like to join their number, that's linked below as well. Thank you so much to you for watching. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. It's gonna be some bloopers now. Delaria Wells, Petty Con Honest? I hadn't thought about it that way, but when I read that I went, oh, so not only is this a Sapphic story, we have a Sapphic... I don't know what this means. This book, while it does tackle necromancy and while there are some difficult moments towards magic,